For a multitude of reasons, the Kansas City Chiefs were probably one of the more scrutinized teams in the NFL last year. Whether it was referee calls, whether it was straight up winning 15 out of 17 games and making their fifth Super Bowl appearance in the last 6 years, the Kansas City Chiefs were, like I said, one of the more scrutinized teams in the NFL last year. However, with a team that is as successful as the Kansas City Chiefs comes a somewhat frequent amount of change within your roster and within the construction of that roster. Looking at who the Kansas City Chiefs are losing in 2025, you have a lot of guys who have become mainstay names for this team, as well as guys who have made impacts in the last few years. Obviously, the big name guys, it's Justin Reed, Tershawn Wharton, Derek Nottie, and DeAndre Hopkins as the main names that are leaving, but you also do have guys like McCole Hardman, like Samaje Perine, Keith Taylor, and Justin Watson that are leaving this team that have been, they're not major guys to the construct of the Chiefs, but they were guys who were a part of the winning program that was the Kansas City Chiefs for the last 6 years. Now, even though there were these losses of key players, there were some additions of guys that are going to be integral pieces to the winning formula for the Kansas City Chiefs. You namely have guys like Elijah Mitchell, you have Jalen Moore, Jerry Tillery, and Christian Fulton come in. Now, I will say that even though that these are guys, between their signings and their re-signings, these are all guys that could make a positive impact on your team. I don't really know if they were the best signings to make. I mean, yes, Elijah Mitchell can be a solid contributor as a rotational back. Mike Edwards can fill in and be a really good starting safety. But the amount of money that they gave to Jalen Moore and the fact that they're taking swings on guys like Jerry Tillery, they're taking swings and, putting themselves in a position to be heavily reliant on guys like Kareem Hunt, like Elijah Mitchell, like Jalen Moore, like Christian Fulton. And, you're not really relying on Gardner Minshew or Bailey Zappi when you sign them to be your backup quarterback, but you are putting yourself in a position where it's like, if anything happens to Mahomes, you're putting your franchise in the hands of Gardner Minshew, or you're putting your franchise in the hands of Bailey Zappi. And I really just don't, probably less than many other backup quarterbacks in the NFL, I just don't like the optics of that. Regardless, it's not really like Kansas City has much of a choice, even though they restructured the contracts of Chris Jones and they restructured Patrick Mahomes as well. It wasn't really like cap space was just at a premium for the Kansas City Chiefs. They still only have about $13.5 million in cap space available. And comparatively, I mean, they re-signed Trey Smith to the franchise tag. The only other move that they make in terms of a trade or anything like that is they do trade Joe Thuney to the Chicago Bears, which actually now I'm realizing that I didn't even mention when looking through the departures for Kansas City, is that trade of Joe Thuney to the Kansas City, or from Kansas City to Chicago. And you get a 4th round pick in 2026, really not a lot in the short term. But at the end of the day, Kansas City, as I already mentioned, they didn't really have much of a chance coming into the offseason. They were either going to have to trade guys like they did with Joe Thuney or restructure almost all of their contracts like they did with Mahomes and Chris Jones. And they still were barely able to get a deal done with Trey Smith and not really have much else added after that. Now on to the draft for Kansas City. This is a team in Kansas City that they have done an okay job adding to positions of need in the past. I mean, you look at guys either in the late first round or deep into day 2 or 3. I mean, names like Jaden Hicks, names like Rashee Rice, like Sky Moore, not really, but Brian Cook, Leo Chenal, George Karlaftis as a first round pick, Creed Humphrey, Noah Gray, Trey Smith. This is a team who's done very well in the past in the draft. And so only having 8 overall selections, and 4 of them being in the top 100, you look at a team like Kansas City and their odds to actually get better through the draft, and you have to think that that's what they're going to do. I don't really know what would be better between adding more possible playmaking or adding more in the trenches. It probably would be the trenches, seeing as this is going to be a team in 2025 relying on a guy who got paid a lot of money in Jalen Moore, another guy who got paid twice as much money in Jawan Taylor to be your tackles. You have Trey Smith and Mike Caliendo as your guards, and you have Creed Humphrey in the middle. I don't know how great your odds are at getting back to a Super Bowl, let alone winning the AFC West or any playoff game with an offensive line that could be as bad as they were last year. They really don't make much of an improvement. Defensively, though, I mean, I guess you have Karlaftis. I guess you have Chris Jones. I guess you have Charles Omenihu. And you're still hoping for guys like Felix Anudike-Uzomah to take that next step. But I don't see it being great. I think the linebacker group for this team without, I guess with Nick Bolton, they re-signed Nick Bolton. But without a true, superstar, you don't have a great time there at linebacker. And at corner, you have Trent McDuffie. That's great. And you're going to really rely on Christian Fulton to be your number 2 guy. But it's pretty thin past those 2 guys. Safety is pretty much the same situation. You have Brian Cook and Mike Edwards. It's pretty thin past those guys. So honestly, anybody on the defense would probably be the best selection, because this is just not a team that looks like they're going to be in a position to win games with their defense. For a grade, I'll give Kansas City a C+. Like I said, they didn't really have a great position coming into this free agency, and the fact that they were able to do a little bit to address some of their needs is a good sign. But it still wasn't great, and you're going to be relying on a lot of guys who, yes, they have done things in the past, but you don't really know if you can rely on them even for this year or for years beyond 2025. And so it's really going to rely on the draft of whether or not this team improves in 2025 in the offseason, because I really don't think they improved through free agency.